Three items are required for an internal combustion engine to run. The first is motion, the second is fuel, the third is spark. Take away one of these items and the engine will not run.
I came down to the garden today to do some tilling, and this is the first time this year I tried to start my tiller, but we got a little bit of a problem. No matter how hard I pull, and no matter how long I pull, the tiller's not starting, which is a common problem after a tiller or lawnmower or any kind of gasoline powered equipment has been left in storage over the winter months. So we're going to have to find out what's wrong and correct the problem. For any internal combustion engine to operate, you need three things. You need movement, you need spark, you need fuel. Well, I have movement here, not a problem with that. So you need to check for spark and fuel. So we're going to do the easier of the two. We're going to check for fuel first. To check for fuel, we have to go into the carburetor. And to access the carburetor, we need to take off the air filter cover and the air filter. So this is the opening to the carburetor. For all intents and purposes, this is a one-barrel carburetor. So what we're going to do, we're going to introduce some starting fluid down into this chamber. Now we don't want to use gasoline because gasoline doesn't evaporate fast enough to form a good vapor for the engine to pull in. So we're going to go ahead and use starting fluid. Some starting fluid down in here, and we'll give it a pull and see if it starts. Okay, so it did take a little bit, so that tells me that I have spark and I have movement, but I don't have fuel. So good chance is my carburetor is going to be plugged up. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and take the carburetor off, and we're going to do a simple cleaning job on it that doesn't involve much, but we do need to remove it. So if you take a look at it, we got the two screws holding the carburetor up against the manifold. We've got some screws here holding the top plate onto the carburetor. We also will have some linkage back down inside here that we'll have to remove. We got a spring linkage down here that goes to the governor that we'll have to remember how to hook back up. So we're going to go ahead and take this apart. It's pretty simple. Just take some basic tools. These small four-cylinder engines are different from manufacturer to manufacturer, but they're also pretty basic and they're pretty much all the same. So it really doesn't take much of a mechanical mind to service these, but we'll try to make this as simple as possible. Now I also noticed right here, we have some oil right here standing in this compartment where the air filter went. So that's going to be interesting on how the oil ended up at the top of the engine when it should be down below. This is telling me that maybe somewhere this tiller got tipped over and some oil came out of the engine, but we'll look into that also. Just make a mental note on where all your fasteners, nuts, bolts, screws went to, so you can put them all back together again. Now when doing a job like this does not want to come off easily, so you don't want to force anything. You want to take a look around and see what might be holding it in place. Now I can see there's a hose over on this side that's holding part of this into place. So like I said, don't force anything, just be patient, and see this piece came right off. And now we can take this piece off right here. and this pretty much exposes the carburetor. So we can see where we have some linkage right here. Now this is a spring, so we want to be careful not to release this and have the spring go shooting somewhere. And then we have the rod to the throttle right underneath it. We also have the hose from the fuel tank going to the carburetor right here also. We're going to have to remove the fuel line, and there's a couple of ways of doing it. One would be using a clamping rheostat like this. Now, before you end up squishing this, you just kind of want to see if the line is still pliable. If your line's rock hard, I would not use a clamp because you might crack the line. If it is rock hard, you can either replace it or you can remove the clamp down here and use like a golf tee to put up into the hose to stop the gas flow. But because mine still feels a little bit pliable, I'm going to go ahead and pinch it and lock it with that and then remove the clamp. With the hose clamp removed, we're going to slide forward. We're going to disconnect the linkage and slide the carburetor off, just like that. Now this carburetor was a little bit hard to get off, and I'll show you why. But first I'm going to show you some of the parts. So this is going to be the float chamber right here. This right here is the choke. This basically, when the choke is all the way open, you'll have more air than fuel. If you choke it, you have more fuel than air. So you always want to start an engine that's cold with it choked, so you have a richer fuel going into the combustion chamber. On the back side here, this is your throttle. This allows a certain amount of fuel mixture into the combustion chamber, and I had a difficult time removing the rod up here because, well, I can't even move it. My throttle plate is rusted shut. So I'm going to have to take some penetrating fluid and spray it down inside of here and see if I can loosen up that plate to get the throttle working. So I'm going to be working on this, and then once this is freed up, I'll come back to cleaning the carburetor. We're going to go ahead and start cleaning this carburetor. We'll just let the penetrating fluid work on my throttle plate here. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to remove the cap for the float. And if you do this gently enough, you should be able to reuse the gasket. If the gasket happens to break, you can get a replacement. In fact, you can get a replacement carburetor kit for not too much money that will have a brand new float, needle and seat. So inside doesn't look too bad. So this is the float. If you just slide this little pin out right here, that holds the float into place. And as you take the float off, you'll see the needle for the float right there. So the whole point of doing all this is we're going to try to open up all the different orifices so we can spray carburetor cleaner. Now, I do have this carburetor cleaner right here. It's important you make sure you have the straw so you can get inside all the orifices. Now, I'd wear safety glasses because you never know when some of this carburetor cleaner is going to kick back into your face. And carburetor cleaner is better than mace if it gets in your eyes. So we're going to go through and we're going to start spraying all the little holes and chambers of this carburetor to clean everything up. And I really should be putting on some gloves to do this. So you want to look around for all the different vent holes and metering jets and spray carburetor cleaner into all these passages to clean everything up. If you have some carburetor dip cleaner, sometimes you can buy it in a gallon. It has a little basket in it. You can put your carburetor and all the parts in it. You go ahead and dip it. It's quite caustic. It will remove all the grease, grime, and tarnish that could be on there. Now, as we're doing this, I have an old toothbrush that we can use. You can get it wet with some of the solvent down there. And we're going to go ahead and clean this all up. The gasoline, the fuel comes into this chamber there, so we're going to go ahead and flush that out. And I also have some Q-tips that we can use to clean that up also. So everything was going really good until I tried spraying carburetor cleaner through this passageway right here, and anything that's sprayed through here should come out right here, but no fluid was coming out. So I had to take out what's called the jet, or the metering jet, and I have it right here. It just has a little slot right here on the end that allows you to put a screwdriver in it to take it out. And in this metering jet is like a little teeny tiny hole, and that was plugged up. And so what I did, I took one of my wire brushes and I took out one of the stainless steel wires in my wire brush, and I fed it through that hole just like so to break out the garbage that was inside there. After that was broken out, I was able to put the carburetor cleaner in there and clean it out. So now that metering jet is nice and clean, and so is the passageway going through here is nice and clean. Now, all carburetors have a method to adjust the mixture between the fuel and the air. It's basically called a mixer screw, and you have to look around for it, and this one is right here. And what they have done, they've put a little black cap on it, so I guess for two reasons. One, so it wouldn't turn, and to keep people from adjusting it, because if you're not careful, this is where you can really mess up your carburetor. So we're going to gently lift this off, as not to lift it. Now, you could probably take it off with a pair of needle nose pliers, but the problem is when you do that, you end up pinching it more than you are pulling it. So if you take a look right here, you can see that adjustment. So what we're going to do, so we don't mess up the adjustment, we're going to screw it all the way in. Now we're going to notice where this is pointing. So this is pointing right to this point right here. So I'm going to take my screwdriver, I'm going to make a mark right there, and so what I'm going to do, I'm going to screw it in half turn. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and an 1/8. So I'm going to take this out now. I'm going to remember 4 and an 1/8, so that when it's time, once the passageway here is cleaned out, I'm going to send it all the way home, and then unscrew it 4 and an 1/8 half turns, so I get the adjustment correct back there. And if you take a look, there's just the smallest little teeny, I don't know what to call it. It's not quite a point, but we'll just call it a point. So we're going to take our carburetor cleaner and we're going to blast it right in there, and it's actually coming through this hole, teeny tiny little hole right there. So that's nice and clean now. So we're going to put the adjustment screw back into place. And screw it all the way home. And then we're going to take it out 4 and an 1/8 turn. This is probably where most people will mess up their carburetor adjustments, is on this. So there's an 1/8. So there's the 1/8 is taken care of. Then we go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's pointing exactly to the same spot it was originally. Now the only way you can actually adjust this is while the engine is running. You need to adjust it back and forth to get your idle. Okay, so we have the metering jet now, so we're going to put that back inside here. Now these are brass, so you just want to snug them up. You don't want to torque them too tight. Okay, just nice and tight there. So now we're just going to reassemble this the same way it was disassembled. So we're going to take a look at the needle valve right here. It's made out of rubber. That looks like it's in good condition, and that will fit right back into there. Then we got the little pivot shaft right here that goes through this hole here, and it goes through to this other side. Now this was kind of tight when I took it out. There we go. It's going in just nice. I'm just going to lightly tap it so you can see it's coming out on both sides. And then this should be able to go up and down freely to float, so that when it goes up, it shuts the flow of gasoline coming into the chamber. Now we're going to inspect our gasket. The gasket's in good position, or good condition. So we're going to put this back on, and then we got the bolt right here that goes back into the bottom of the chamber. And we're going to tighten this up. Like I said, everything's snug. Don't torque it too hard. Now normally I'd be wearing gloves for this, but when it comes to some of these fine adjustments and having to pick up small parts, sometimes I just need to be able to feel better with my fingertips. Okay, so everything is cleaned out. I've used Q-tips and toothbrushes to clean everything up. Everything looks good. So, time to reinstall it onto the lawnmower. Also, just as a note, this right here is an idle adjustment screw. So if you screw this in, since this is the throttle plate right here, and so the farther you screw this into, it's going to push the idle plate open and speed it up. It's basically just to set the idle. You don't want this all the way shut. So I'm just going to leave it where it is. If it doesn't maintain an idle, then you can just open this up just a hair. Okay, this is our carburetor, and you can see there's some passageways going through the back end of this where it bolts up against the manifold. And if you look at this gasket, the gasket covers some of the pathways, and so you have to make sure that the gasket is in pretty good condition so you don't have a vacuum or a fuel leak here. So we're going to go ahead and put this back onto the bolts, slide it home, move our gas line out of the way. Just like so. Now before we tighten anything up, while it still moves around, we want to reconnect this adjustment rod. It goes right down, well, let me do that again. It goes right down in this hole, just like so. Pretty simple. And then this little fine spring, get it on the right side of here. There's an itty bitty hole right there, and that spring will go right back inside this hole, just like that. Okay, so that's hooked back together again. We can take our other gasket, and this goes on like so. There's a little notch right here that lines up to the corresponding hole right there. That goes on just like so. Okay, then we're going to take our hose clamp. I really don't like the worm style hose clamps for these teeny hoses. I like the pinch style, but I don't have any, so we'll have to use it. I'm going to put the hose back onto the nipple right there, push it down like so. Slide the hose clamp down there, get my screwdriver, and tighten this up. And we're going to release the pinch, the hemostat there. I'm just going to pinch that hose so it goes back into the fully open position. This is the choke lever. So this pin right here goes down to that slot right there. So you can open and choke it just like that. Then we have this back assembly right here to put back on. We'll have to move these all the way back so they fit through these slots right here. It's pretty much just remove and replace. You just have to remember the order of everything. And just as a side note, this tiller is actually a Craftsman tiller I bought 38 years ago when Sears was still around. It's done. I've replaced the engine twice, and I've replaced the transmission once. So this tiller has seen a lot of tilling. And I know what you're thinking, and you're right. I hate to admit it, but the engine is from Harbor Freight. And I have to admit, it's a pretty good engine. There's some things I don't like from Harbor Freight. There's some things I really do. Anything that's made out of plastic, Harbor Freight plastic is not really good. But for other things, it's not bad. But this engine has been pretty decent. Now, this is a plastic piece, so you don't want to over tighten anything. Just make everything snug. Now there's a breather hose back here. It's supposed to be nice and pliable and rubber. This thing is rock hard. And if I try to push that into place, it would probably snap in two. So I took this off again. I'm going to go ahead and attach it to the base where it belongs. And then I'm going to very carefully thread it very carefully thread it back through this hole right into there. I'm afraid if I didn't do that, it would just snap on me. I'm going to go ahead and put these nuts back on. So put the filter plate back into position. Like I said, this is just remove and replace. Take it apart and then just put it back together again the same way. Mechanical things are actually quite simple to fix. It's the diagnostic part of it that's the difficult part. But most things are just remove and replace. So as long as you can replace what you removed, you'll be just fine. Okay, I'm not going to put the filter back on because I'm going to have to put some starting fluid in here. The carburetor is going to be probably empty. I'm sure the float's going to be full of gas by now, but we're going to have to use some starting fluid just to make sure it starts up and the vacuum of the engine will start pulling the gas through the carburetor. Okay, so we're going to give this a little bit of a spray. And choke it a bit. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope you learned something useful in this little endeavor of cleaning out the carburetor. Just remember, 3 things are needed to keep an engine running. That's movement, spark, and fuel. Please subscribe. If you have any questions, just leave me a comment and I'll try to get back to you. And I'll send some more videos your way very soon. Thank you. Okay, now here's another issue we talked about. So we have movement, and we're going to introduce some fuel in here. So we have fuel, we have movement, but nothing's happening. So the thing that's missing this time is spark. So what we're going to do, we're going to pop off the spark plug here, and I do believe this is a 3/4 inch. No, that's a 13/16. And if you take a look at this spark plug tip, it has some moisture on it, some oil, and it looks like it's been fouled out. But this is a quick enough solution to this problem. I got a wire brush, so we're going to brush this up real nice. The gap on this is usually around 19 to 25 thousandths. We're not going to worry about that because I know the gap looks pretty decent. So after we're going to clean that up and wipe it down. So this is an example. You take just one of those items away from movement, spark, and fuel. You remove one of those and it just won't run. Okay, so we're going to put this back inside. Now when tightening up spark plugs, you got to be careful because they have a porcelain top. And if you bend it over too much, you can snap it off. Just nice and snug. Nothing more. Let's put the wire back on. So in that case, we had fuel, we have movement, we're missing the spark until I cleaned up the spark plug, and it ran just fine. Spark plugs can foul out from putting too much fuel, in this case too much starting fluid into the carburetor, and the moisture basically grounded out the electrodes. If you got loose valve guides or piston rings, then oil from the crankcase can come up and foul out the spark plug also. So that's another example of what you can do to make sure your tiller or your lawnmower will start. One more thing before we go. When you have filthy, greasy, dirty hands, there's a really neat mechanics tip on how to clean your hands. And this is really slick. Get a little bit of sugar, maybe a tablespoon or so, put in your hands. Get some dish liquid. Now this is really good for 2 reasons. One, the sugar gives you some really good grit to scrub the grease. And then the sugar also reacts to the detergent to really loosen the dirt. I've been doing this for years, and it's one of the best little tips I can probably give somebody. Now that is just slicker than slick. Actually, it's pretty clean. Anyway, thank you again.